Hi, everybody. It's Jim Ostrowski, back with the Free the Children book movement, book bomb. And I'm doing this one, doing another live stream. I'm doing this one in the car for reasons which I'll allude to in a second. So, um, the big argument for government schools, when all is said and done, um, is that without government schools, the poor and the disadvantaged wouldn't be able to be educated and have successful lives. So earlier on today, I did a podcast, 13 minutes, which I think basically exploded that myth, because I'm not fooled by progressive ideology. In other words, this sort of fantasy world of we would like X to happen, so we think X happened. It's really idiotic and stupid. I wrote a book called Progressivism, a primer that dissects the progressive mindset in very effectively in 200 pages. So, what I'm doing, since I want to free the children from these institutions, I'm actually looking at the evidence for that proposition. What do government schools do for the poor? What happens to people who come out of government schools? And as a criminal defense lawyer, I know, frankly, what happens to a lot of the people who went to government schools. And so if you watch my podcast, and frankly, my 13-minute podcast today is the best podcast I ever did. I didn't have a script. I was in a hurry. I worked 19 hours yesterday. I didn't have a chance to really plot it out, but I think I really nailed it. I nailed this argument in a somewhat humorous way. So what I pointed out, just to carry on the lesson from this morning, so I pointed out that 20% of people who come out of the government schools are functionally illiterate, and 10%, the promise of the government school was, well, they'll be educated. Well, they're not being educated, um, and they'll actually attend, because that's the point of the compulsion. Well, 10% are absent at any given time, so they're not even attending. And leaving aside, and even many of the people who are attending are just there physically, and many of them have to be drugged up to sort of force them not to act out, because they don't want to be there. They don't want to be there. So many people have to be drugged. All those issues are discussed in excuse me, in government schools are bad for your kids. So I made kind of a humorous point today, and I said, well, so where's all the missing kids? So, where's all the missing kids? And I said, well, I know where the missing kids are. So I flipped the camera behind me and I said, well, they're in part one of Buffalo City Court getting arraigned for street crime. And I just made the sort of a joke that, well, they're getting their bachelor's degree in street crime. So then I went on and I said, well, I walked a little bit down the street, turned the camera around, and I said, well, what do they do after they go to city court? Well, they get their BA in street crime from city court, and then they study for their master's degree at the Erie County Holding Center. And then finally, I walked by the federal court, and I said, well, that's where they get their PhD in crime. Mostly drug crime. That's where you make the most money. And again, it's because this is deadly serious. Uh, there was a story in the Buffalo News a few years ago about some house party and the reason the story was in the Buffalo News. There was a house party where many of the people went there, and there was a little bit of vandalism. And they said, well, the people at the party were from the elite private Catholic schools of Buffalo, and it was like trying to get some sort of negative publicity against the Catholic schools. I'm not exactly sure what the motivation was, but I said, that it turned out, by the way, that the people who did the vandalism were actually from a government school. So, and I pointed out in one of the comments, I said, you have a good idea here. You have a really good idea. Whenever somebody commits a crime, we should publicize where they went to school. Shouldn't we know where people went to school to determine whether, well, maybe they didn't receive that good of an education? I'm not saying that there's not free will and people don't make moral choices, but when there's a certain pattern of people who are failing in life after we've been promised, after we pay huge amounts of money, that this will make sure they get a fair chance in life, and it's obvious that they're not getting a fair chance. Shouldn't that be something that is discussed? And I've taken that to heart, and I believe that government schools should be judged in part by how many of their people, particularly the disadvantaged people, because that's the whole point of them. That's the whole point. Because most people believe that the middle class, the wealthy, and even the solid working class would take care of their kids. They always have. They always did before government schools came. But the poor won't. The disadvantaged people won't. So when you track down what happens to those people, many of them end up in part one of city court. Many of them end up in the holding center. They get their bachelor's in city court. They get their master's degree in the holding center. They get their PhD from federal court for drug dealing. But the ultimate cap off, the ultimate prize, is what I will call the Lifetime Achievement Award, and that's hard to get, and that's reserved for, I guess, the criminals who commit the most serious crimes. And so where do you get the Lifetime Achievement Award? You get that from state correctional facility, such as the one that I'm looking at right now, and hopefully you can see that camera angle. That's Wendy Correctional Facility, and I've visited there. I have visited Sing Sing. I've been in Attica many times, including recently. These are horrible places, and I can guarantee you, I looked for statistics on it, but they're hard to find. I can guarantee you that the overwhelming percentage of people who are in these state correctional facilities went to a government school. And why isn't it fair to ask, well, shouldn't that be part of the evaluation of whether these prisons are working, or whether they are prisons, public schools are daytime juvenile detention centers. So this is the point I'm trying to make. If you look at the actual results of government schools, you see a lot of people who are dysfunctional. You see a lot of people who are illiterate. A lot of people never went to class. A lot of people dropped out and went into a life of crime. So why shouldn't we begin to question whether these places are good for poor people? I think they are absolutely not good for poor people. I think that forcing these kids to sit in a room for 7 hours a day when they don't want to be there, and where school's interrupted by a lot of other people who don't want to be there as well. This is not good for poor people. It's bad for poor people. And I could say a lot more about the topic, but I'm going to end the podcast right there. I'm going to go on to another interesting location shortly. So stay tuned. And the book party's tonight at Wanaka Grill, 8 o'clock to 10 p.m. Free the Children and 4 of my other books will be available for sale. If you can't make it, you can buy the book online for $7 or $12 on Amazon, or you can do me a huge favor, find the prior 13-minute podcast, which is really, I think it's pretty good podcast, and just link that around. And if you come to the party, 4 of my books will be for sale, in addition to the 3 books just for sale, in addition to Free the Children. So over and out. I'll talk to you later. Stay tuned to this station.